Hi there, welcome to this, the Rethinking the Human Factor Cybersecurity mini-series with our friends at ProofPoint. So, for those of you who are new to the show, what can you expect? Well, one thing that we pride ourselves on at the Rethinking the Human Factor is bringing insights from outside of the cybersecurity industry, people who specialize, whether from an academic or a practitioner perspective, on aspects of human awareness, behavior, and culture. We get them to come on the show. They say some amazing insights, gold nuggets as I like to think of them. You get to sit back, get away from the screen, listen in, tune into those insights, and then take them away and consider them within the context of your own organizations and how you can bring around real demonstrable positive changes in security awareness, behavior, and culture. Now, episode 1 of this mini-series is going to be an absolute belter as far as I'm concerned, because we have for you Andrew Rose, who's the in-house resident CISO at ProofPoint now in their European market. Now, Andrew and I go back a little way now, and every year just feels like, oh no, we're putting another on top of that as well. I was really impressed by Andrew many years ago when I kicked off my own research program into the human factor, and we shared a stage together. And he was the first CISO in all the research that I've been doing who was actually talking about applying behavioral insights to the challenge of employee education, awareness, and behavior. And he was the first person out of all the interviews I'd done, and there were about 180 of them, who was actually clued into this. And more importantly, taking theory and applying it. So he's been a natural ally in many ways and to have this conversation. And he's been an ambassador for that train of thought now for quite some time. And he's carrying that forward with his role at ProofPoint. So, Andrew, thank you very much for joining us on the show.
It's my pleasure to be here, Bruce. Lovely to be here again.
Great. I think, some people might think you might struggle to get more than an hour out of him. And I'm like, no, we've already had more than an hour. And that was a couple of years ago. I think we're going to get even more out of him for this particular episode. So fantastic. Now, for those of you who are new to the show and new to Andrew, can you just explain a little bit about the journey you've been on and how you got to that human is the center of everything type of mindset?
So I've been in security for goodness knows how many years now, over 20 years, and been a CISO in many organizations, including some global law firms and a MasterCard subsidiary and even UK air traffic control. But I guess my epiphany came when I actually had a break in between those CISO roles and was working for Forrester Research. And so I was at Forrester for about 4 years. And in that time, I picked up the cybersecurity awareness banner, and that was one of my specialist areas. And I dug into it, and I spoke to many CISOs like you did to figure out what was the best way to apply security awareness in an enterprise. And I actually came away from that pretty depressed because no one seemed to be doing a very good job of it. So I reached out further out to advertising agencies and other influencers to see how other people were changing people's behavior. Mm-hmm. And that's where I came across the insight that enabled me to go, hang on, this can be different. This can be done much better. And it was a university professor, I think it was Princeton or Stanford, I can't remember quite now, who was working with some of the big Silicon Valley organizations, telling them how to create applications and make them sticky and make them sort of addictive in a way. Yep. It was him that I had a conversation with him, and I came away with that thinking, I can take what he's learned and what he's teaching and apply that to security. And so I wrote these reports for Forrester. And then when I left Forrester, I went back to being a CISO again. I thought, right, it's time to eat my own dog food and actually apply this and see if it works. And it did, and it worked really well. And we won a UK Cybersecurity Awareness Campaign of the Year that year that we pushed it out. And it was really effective. And it's just that really opened my eyes to the fact that security awareness is absolutely fundamental and becoming increasingly so. And if you get it right, it can make a really big difference in your organization. So I've been on that crusade ever since.
Yeah. And when you get to it, you're like, okay, what percentage of known, and I'm using the phrase known security incidents are actually the root cause of that is down to choices people make. The figures vary, but at the end of the day, most figures are in the top 90s in terms of human is the root cause behind that. So it's almost like the elephant in the room. We know from the actual evidence that the root cause behind all these incidents is people. So you can choose to either tackle that or you can choose to try and focus on some other area as well. So do you think it is the elephant in the CISO's room, that whole, the human aspect, the humans being the risk within information security?
It really is. I mean, I've struggled with the terminology because we constantly talk about people as either the weakest link or the first line of defense or the last line of defense. And I'm thinking, are there any of those fair? And I think really what we should call people now is the primary attack surface. That's what they are. Attackers are looking to leverage your staff to get access to your data and to compromise your systems. So they are the primary attack surface, and identity is the new perimeter these days. The stats we see are really, they suggest that this is all correct. The Verizon data breach report just came out. I think it just came out today for 2021.
Right.
And I've only read about 4 pages of it. So, but the stat that jumped out at me straight away stated that 85% of successful attacks involved a human element. Right. So it's huge. You think about 85% of attacks involve a human element, and yet the budget that you spend as a CISO, how much of that budget do you spend on that human factor? 5%, perhaps, if that. It's pushing it. And you see that the attacks just focus on people continually. Email is the major channel of cyber attacks. I think the stats we had said 94% of cyber attacks start via email. And of those, 99 point something percent require the user to do something, to open an attachment, click on a link, hand out credentials, pay an invoice, buy some Apple cards, whatever it happens to be. They're waiting for the human to make that mistake, because that gives the attacker the way into the enterprise, and that enables them to then see through the malicious value chain. And there's loads of other data that sort of goes around that. I think Verizon last year stated that 37% of attacks used stolen credentials.
Right.
Okay. So I'm not sure what it says this year, but I bet that's probably gone up. But that just shows you that stolen credentials, you get that from just tricking a staff member to give them out. And that was the most successful attack vector, stolen credentials. So it is all about the human aspect. And it's just, there's an imbalance there between how much time and attention we spend focusing on technology and the feeding and watering that needs, and how much time and attention we spend on the human factor that needs to be rebalanced, I think.
I think that's a really interesting point, because that's just something that I raise with people is, when you look at what is your budget for trying to address those challenges of awareness, behavior, and culture, and then you compare that to the rest of the budget, and it's so disproportionate.
Absolutely. I mean, as I just said, 94% of threats come in via email. So do you spend 94% of your budget protecting your email channel? Absolutely not. There's a balance to be had. I mean, I think all the security controls we put in place right now, or the technology, it's still essential. You can't get rid of it. But the time has come now to see that the attackers have moved on. The attackers no longer sit there in their little rooms figuring out what type of firewall you have. They sit there thinking about which staff members work for you. How could I leverage their knowledge or their love of sailing or whatever, or skiing, to send them a phishing email, which they'll click on? That's what they focus on. I don't think the majority of the security community has pivoted yet to realize that that's where they now need to start paying their attention.
Can I just ask, why do you think that is the case, that when you think about the people, process, technology, why as an industry have we not really focused on the people aspect of it? I think we've got the technology bit. We're committed in that space. There's always room for improvement. Then there's the process element, organizational processes, and looking at the vulnerabilities within them and getting that right. Why is it taking us the best part? I mean, you over 20 years experience, me over 20 years experience. Why are we taking so long to get out of the people bit?
It's a maturity journey. But look, most security professionals grew up in a technology world. They grew up with sort of hands-on keyboard doing technology tasks, grew up in an IT department. They're naturally focused on the technology piece being the primary thing they focus on. And then secondary, once you've got the technology set up, how do you use the technology effectively and make sure it works for you? Process. And so it's just now perhaps that they're coming to the human factor and thinking, okay, now we need the people bit as well to put that cherry on the top. I don't know. There's lots of other people are coming to that same conclusion. Perhaps me and you were just a little bit further ahead in that sort of thinking. But I think it's just a journey, a maturity journey that people have got to go through. And it's just because of the background, they go through that technology phase first. And the technology takes so much time and attention. It takes so much work and resource to put it in place, to choose the right product, to implement the product and configure it and make it run. That's, a job of years. So it just takes you a while to get through all of that. And it continually needs to be changed and rebuilt. So it just, you can never really take your eye off the technology problem, because it needs that attention all the time. So it just takes away the resources and time you've got to focus on the process and focus on the people.
I sometimes do wonder whether or not, the technology piece, when I think about, technology enforcing organizational policy based upon, like, these are the risks that are unacceptable to our organization. So I'm going to find some way of controlling those risks. Sometimes you're going to try looking at that and try and do that in the most economically viable way. So, putting in antivirus or content scanning your email with an antivirus product as well. So you can look deep into the actual email that you're receiving and being able to identify, for example, it's got a dodgy looking file attached to it based upon our database of signatures or our AI. That economically, because of the number of emails you receive, you go, okay, that as a tool might suit that. It's better than training people to try and don't click. Mm-hmm. For me, sometimes when I look at the technology, it's about, well, actually, the technology makes sense because it's an economic argument. And sometimes when we've looked at that, it's like, let's focus on technology and let's make this as we can, we are as efficient as we can. And then we haven't necessarily looked at the human bit, because actually the human bit, one, you can't solve it. Yeah. You can't. There will always be somebody that does something which goes completely against grain. And the second one is that it is an investment which does take years. I mean, if you want to try and change behavior across, let's say, 25,000 employees in 12 different countries around the world, it's a significant effort.
It is. And there's some analysts I talked to in the past who said, just don't bother with security awareness. It's never going to work. You're never going to get to the efficacy rate of an antivirus product. You're never going to get to that 99%, whatever it was at the time. So don't bother, which I completely disagree with. But I do think there's a sequence to it, as you said. Let's go back to the email example. If 94% of threats start via email, if you've got a completely green field, no controls canvas of an organization, what's the first thing you do? You don't train your staff. The first thing you do is you stop the 94% by putting in an email filter. And that gets you a huge way into protecting your organization. So that's the first thing you'll put in place, the technology. And then you'll do the education as the second stage of your maturity journey. So there's definitely a sequencing to it as well.
Yeah, it's almost like you make your advances, significant steps forward, and then you're looking as a CISO at continually looking for the marginal improvements across as many different areas as possible, so that when you combine them together, it's a significant step this year. But it's just, we've increased by 1% here, 1.5% here, 2% here. So it is that maturity piece, isn't it? It's like you've got so far, and now you're thinking, what are the opportunities for improving as we go further?
I'm seeing that more and more, I think, because now what we're starting to see in the industry is security awareness professionals showing up. And that hasn't really happened before. And it's always been interesting to see that the responsibility for doing awareness training has landed on effectively technology guys and girls to try and train people. The technology guys who've got no understanding really of behavioral science or teaching practices. And so perhaps that's another limitation that we've lived with, just doing this off the side of a desk by using a guy who also does firewalls and the rest of his time. Now we're getting security awareness professionals coming in who understand that the learning science and learning behaviors, etc. So that is going to hopefully give us some more acceleration in this space and enable us to push on with this awareness piece.
That's really interesting, because I remember the SANS Institute a number of years ago, they did some research across their membership. And I think what was interesting was the percentage of people who responded to the survey who said that education and awareness is my responsibility, but it's one of a series of hats that I wear. And the figure was really high. I mean, we're talking at the high end of the 80s. Wow. So, and that's for an organization that they have quite a significant focus upon education and awareness. And you're like, wow. So this responsibility for the human aspect, which is the root cause behind so many of the actual incidents, is often invested in either a person who is not a professional, who's not completely focused on that role. And if you're lucky, then in my experience, what seems to be the case is that your education and awareness person is actually part of a team. So they may have 3 or 4 people, but they might be working in an organization with 20, 50, 100,000 employees, and yet they still have the responsibility for a changing culture. It's massive. Sometimes it feels just disproportionate, both in terms of budget and resource to bring around that change.
I think that's the thing to take away from this. It is disproportionate. Right now, we're not focusing enough resource and money and attention on the people side of the problem, but that's where the threats are right now. And so it's just a call out for all security professionals to think that through, really, and think that people-centric side to their security program. How do I spend more time and attention on that side? Because that's where the attackers are looking. I can't get rid of all the technology. That's got to stay. But how do I now look more onto the people side?
So, I mean, you've always been active in this particular space, and I know you raise the question all the time, but why is it that even after all the training that we give people, okay, and when I say all the training, it sounds like it's something we're doing every week, and clearly we're not, which is another thing that we can come to. But why is it, do you think, that people still, after they've had the training and they've passed the test, and they've said they're not going to do something, that they do it?
Which, the ultimate $1 million question, isn't it, really? I think firstly, you've got to think the fact that probably there's still opportunity for security awareness on its own to be improved. We did some analysis recently and we found that 2/3 of staff know what phishing and malware is, but a third don't. And only a third of staff know what ransomware is, which means that 2/3 don't. So, and we still see all those stats that come out in the newspapers about people picking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as their favorite password, whatever it happens to be. So there's still lots of opportunity for improving and relaying those messages across. But you ask a good question there. For those that are educated and those have been through the program, why do they still click? And it does all come down to this human psychology piece, which me and you both love. And that's something the attackers think through. And perhaps because this is being done off the side of a desk with people who aren't specifically trained in this, us as defenders don't necessarily think this through properly. But ultimately, it comes down to the attackers trying to manipulate our human brains, our human operating system, by trying to trigger an emotional response. When I look through all the emails that we receive and look through the ones that are successful and the ones that people are clicking on, it's consistently about the things that we recognize. It's the click on this link because you're about to miss a parcel. Your account has been cancelled. There's been some fraud on your bank account, or you've just won $100 million through a lottery that you didn't enter. Seeking to trigger those emotional responses, because if you have an emotional response to that email, it doesn't engage your rational brain. So all the teaching we've been pushing into their rational brain is just left on the side, and they've already clicked before they've even thought it through because they have that emotional response. So that's one of the major reasons that people do make these clicks. But we don't help ourselves either, because actually we have conflicting messages within the enterprise. So as security professionals, we're saying, okay, you have to stick to policy, you have to question suspicious activities, you have to think before you click. All of those pieces. And as soon as we leave the room, the line manager walks in and goes, right, guys, you've got to innovate. The customer is always right. You've got to get it done quickly. And so you've got these conflicting messages. One of the analysis pieces I brought out from NATS, working at air traffic control, was we looked at lots of statistical analysis about behavior, and we found that the line manager was the most influential person in that employee's life. If the line manager believed in security, they would believe in security. And so when the line manager comes in and says, innovate, do it quickly, customers are always right, that has more of an influence on the user than you saying, stick to policy, be suspicious. And so we've got that tension as well in there. So all of those things come together, and it's like, we're not setting the staff up for success, really.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, because as you're talking through that, I'm like going, so we've got one set of values that belong to information security. We've got another set of values that belong to another stakeholder in the whole equation. And then the piece you talk about that at NIST, what you were able to identify is that actually between those two different stakeholders, people are going to lean towards a line manager.
Yeah.
Okay. And I guess when I think of values, it automatically brings me around to, in the new book, Cybersecurity ABCs that I've done, the culture piece is all about cultural values. And those values underpin the behaviors that are the things that we observe around us day in, day out. So you can say one thing, like an organization can say, this is really important, but operationally, this is actually what happens, and you get that difference between the two. So the role of culture and the values within that culture, it's really important, because when we often talk about culture, we talk about the culture of the audience. We think about, from a geographical perspective, it's not just about that. It's about understanding that the culture will actually influence the behavior. So it's not just about how do I incorporate cultural context into how I communicate, education, awareness type things. Surely it's also about what is the culture within the audience, which is going to drive their behaviors as well.
I actually think we should take a step back even from there, because we constantly talk about security culture, but I'm not sure anyone's ever really given a really clear definition of what security culture is and what we're trying to achieve. And I came up with a little one slide version of it, which is, it's the ABC, awareness, behavior, culture, are the three things you go through. In awareness, what you do is you're the CISO, you're shouting at the audience saying, you need to do this, you need to do that, you shouldn't click. And that's awareness for you. When you get to behavior, then you've got the CISO saying you shouldn't click, but you also have your own internal voice going, no, I shouldn't click.
Yep.
I shouldn't click on this. I should be suspicious. So then you've got two voices in your head going, I shouldn't click. I should do the right thing. And that's behavior. And when you get to culture, what you have is a case of you have all the voices in your head. You have everyone around you. It becomes we don't click. It becomes, the CISO speaking to me saying I shouldn't click. I've got my own internal voice saying I shouldn't click. And the whole peer expectation around me of the people I work with, they expect me not to click as well. And so it becomes, he tells me to do it in awareness. I tell me to do it in behavior, and we tell us to do it in culture. And that's what my sort of definition of culture is. And you can't move to that rapidly. You have to slowly build up to it. And you see really good examples of this in safety critical organizations where they've built that safety culture, and safety sort of comes first. And if anyone has a concern about a safety issue, they're fully empowered to step up and sort of say to the land manager, no, we have to question this. I know that you want me to do it quickly and innovate, but actually this is going to undermine safety. Therefore, we have to stop and look at this again. And that's entirely encouraged. We have to get to the same stage with security. And we will get there. It's just going to take some time.
It takes time. Yes. Okay. So going back to the behavioral piece about why people click, there's an author that we've both read. This is Steve Peters, Professor Steve Peters, and he wrote the book, The Chimp Paradox. Can you just explain to us and to the listeners the Chimp Paradox and how, I guess, in a way that's helped you in terms of how you've contextualized the problem and then sort of come up with your ideas about how to address that human aspect within security?
Yeah, the Chimp Paradox talks exactly to that emotional response. And it was recommended to me by those behavioral scientists at air traffic control as well. They use that book a lot. So it's a really interesting book and worth some time thinking about. But effectively, every person has three aspects to their personality. The first is the chimp, which is there to sort of keep you alive and to recognize that there are tigers in the woods and immediately get you to run away from the danger. And it does that. It's a bit selfish and internal looking, and it does the right thing because it feels that's the right thing to do. And it doesn't learn. It just reacts to stuff. Yeah. So that's the sort of chimp person. Then you've got your person, your human person, which is what we consider to be ourselves, the logical, rational, thinking, considerate person that we think we are. Yeah. We look at the facts, we make conclusions, and we take account of other people, and we try to come to the best conclusion for everybody.
Yep.
And that's fine, but it's slow and it takes lots of energy to be that person. But that's the person we teach, because that person, that part of your character can learn new things. So when we're doing security awareness training, that's the person we're teaching. And so you can already see the problem there, because if the chimp gets to react first, the chimp hasn't been taught. The chimp will just do whatever it's doing to self-validate doing the selfish thing. But there's the third part to it as well, which is, I think they call it the computer in the book, which I think I call the robot when I talk to the people. But it's just something that just repeats things that it's been taught. So it can be taught by either the chimp or the person, but it becomes subconscious. You train a reaction into yourself, and that's just what you do. And I think the good example of how this all hangs together, I thought, was actually learning to drive a car.
Yeah.
So, you start off as the terrified monkey going, oh my God, I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to kill other people, or even worse, I'm going to stall it at the traffic lights and look like an idiot. And my social position will plummet. So your chimp starts that whole conversation. And then you have to come in as a human and go, well, hang on a second. Other people can do this. I know it's going to be difficult. I'll just concentrate and try really hard and keep on going, and I'll make mistakes, but I'll get there. And you sort of, and the outcome will be better because I won't need to get the bus anymore. So you've got that bit. And then eventually it becomes the robot does it. It's just like driving. Oh yeah, whatever. Yeah. I do that, don't I? I don't even think about it anymore. And that sort of explains how the brains, how those different aspects of the brains work together. Yeah. But when there's an incident, when there's an issue, when there's something happens, even just like to receive an email, the chimp gets first go at it. The chimp gets first go at everything because it's hardwired into your brain to be on the lookout for the tiger. Yeah. And so when an email arrives, the chimp gets first look, and then the chimp will go, oh my God, this is danger. This is peril. I need to react. My Netflix account is being cancelled. I must click immediately. This is horrific. I couldn't bear to go home without Netflix, whatever it happens to be.
It's the end of the series. I'm just thinking this from a fishing exercise. It would be like, when does the series come to an end?
Yeah.
Okay, let's target it like for the final episode, because that people are Netflix have done their job perfectly. They've got you to the point where you are biting at the bit. The week can't pass, not the week, but the next series can't happen quick enough for you. And you're like, that is the time to attack, isn't it, really?
It is. I mean, there are so many different levers to pull at that point, unfortunately. There was a story just last week about an organization doing a phishing campaign, an internal phishing campaign, where they talked about bonuses. And again, people are going to go for that law. Which ones are going to appeal to them. Redundancies, bonuses, etc. They're going to trigger an emotional response, and they're more likely to click on those. The chimp gets first go at this. So the chimp, if they react emotively, they will click on the link. And so despite the fact you pushed all this training into the person, the human aspect, is never actually considered. It never gets a chance to speak up because the chimp's already clicked. The chimp has already had the emotional response and clicked. And that's why people click, despite the fact we've trained them and told them, because the attackers are forcibly leveraging this. They're creating emails specifically to make your chimp engage and react. Yeah. And so it's unfair, really, sometimes to sort of say, well, you shouldn't have clicked on that, because it's an inbuilt thing. Yeah. Everyone has a chimp. Everyone reacts differently to these things. It's difficult to train your chimp to do anything other than what it does. So it's a really interesting book from that perspective, to see how all that comes together into this.
I remember when I read the book, it was after I'd read like Hyman and Ariely and all those other behavioral psychologists back from the 80s, 90s. And then I was like, oh, right, because they talk about things in a much more from a more scientific cognitive science background. I think what this book does is it takes the science bit and it makes it more accessible for a majority of people. And I think, that whole chimp thing, I will never go to the zoo and look at a chimp the same way again. I will look at it and go, there's me. You are in.
It comes up all the time, doesn't it? You see people, having road rage in their car, or you see, you have an argument, something kicks off, and you're just like, it's their chimp reacting. I'm not going to hold this against them, because it's just their chimp is engaged before the person is engaged. And I know that they're not like this, but let me just step back and wait for the chimp to calm down, and then we can have a conversation. So it does change your perspective on people.
It does sort of, I guess I can almost imagine somebody saying, trying to help you with anger management or dealing with confrontation. So you get trained. Some people do get trained in, how to handle confrontation. And the immediate thing might be, see that person as a chimp, because right now you're just dealing with a chimp, and allow the chimp to sort of, feel comfortable with the chimp. Just recognize it is just the way people are, until you can get over that, and then you can move into the human aspects.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things I find interesting as well, it comes back to that nature versus nurture debate, which has been ongoing for goodness how long. And actually the whole Chimp Paradox model makes both true, because they both apply separately. So nature applies to the chimp. The chimp is who the chimp is, and you can't change that. All you can do is manage that chimp and manage those emotional reactions. But nurture affects the rational and the human side of you. And so, yes, you can change and you can affect that. So both nature and nurture are working together within you, within those different parts of your personality. So it really is a case from a security professional perspective. How do we influence the rational person? And how can we start to look at how we can make that influence spill over into the robot or the computer, the automated side, and even into the emotional side? I've been trying to think about how do we create an emotional response from people that actually has the opposite effect of making them want to click. Yeah. And I haven't done a great deal of research into this right now. It's still just going on in the back of my brain. But I'm thinking, how do we create something within the user that means they don't like to be fooled, that they find it frustrating and annoying and embarrassing to be fooled by clicking on a link. Mm-hmm. And that is something that could create an opposite emotional reaction to say, actually, okay, I need to be careful because I don't like being fooled, so I shouldn't click on this link straight away. That may be able to somehow circumvent that emotional response and program some good things in there.
So I'm going to pick up on that, but maybe examine that from a slightly different perspective. How important do you think it is for the CISO and their team to have a real understanding of what it means to be human, so that they can better design their initiatives, their programs for achieving those sort of those goals of influencing behavior and embedding something within an organizational culture?
I think if they want to go past the A of the ABC, just past awareness, it's essential. And it doesn't necessarily need to be the chimp model, but I think we need to expand our horizons and think differently. I was having a conversation just recently and saying within a security awareness, we've picked off all low-hanging fruit. We've done basic phishing training. We've done e-learning. We've done all the basic things that are going to get you to, now a level of diminishing return in terms of the training that we give. If we want to take it on further, we now need to think differently. And it can be, it can be this Chimp Paradox model, or it can be the BJ Fogg model, which I've used in the past, or many other different models about influence and behavior change that are out there. But we need to start bringing some of that in and sort of rolling some of that into our programs, because that's going to make the difference. That'll give us a slightly different angle, a different way to focus on our communication. And I think there's probably space for all of them. You just have to bring in bits that work at the time and then use that for a while, and then bring in another one and start using that as a model as well. But I think it's important. And I believe that bringing in security awareness professionals is going to enable us to do that, because now it's not just going to be on the technology guys to figure out how do I change behavior. Now it's going to be someone who's specialized in this.
So this opens the question and takes it a little bit further to say, okay, so we know we need the skills to be able to move from the awareness for the A bit to behavior and culture. We need to really understand something about behavior and culture to be able to influence, which has been a mantra of mine for quite some time. And then you talk about, there's an increase in terms of bringing in the awareness people, professionalizing this. Because for me, I mean, it's, we've got our CISSPs, we've got our CISMs and C-risks and etc. It comes to the, professionalizing the industry. What opportunity do you think there is for actually turning the education and awareness responsibility into recognizing it in the form of professionalizing it?
I think there's a huge opportunity there. I don't think anyone's really looked into that and done something with it, but we should do. There's nowhere near the amount of resources out there for security awareness professionals as there is for normal security technology people, in terms of the different conferences and the different educational streams that they can go onto, and the different certifications, as you mentioned. There's just nowhere near the breadth of resource out there for them. That'll change, because every opportunity to bring out a new security certification, someone will find it and monetize it somehow. So that'll definitely change. But we should be looking at that. There's so much opportunity to now focus in on this area and grow it. So I'm looking forward to that.
I've done an interesting interview as part of the cybersecurity mini-series with ProofPoint, where we actually interviewed somebody who I remember he did a TED talk, and he was talking about how technology companies need to recruit from humanities, and how humanities people need to sort of get training in technology. And it's like it's a fusion of the two. And it just makes me wonder, should we be taking our existing, our governance, risk and compliance people and then layering them with insight into awareness, behavior and culture? Or do we sort of reach out and go, do you know what, we're going to take these humanities focused, maybe marketing focused, business focused people, and we're going to then layer on top of them some level of information security knowledge? Or is it a combination of the two, depending on your own organization? Where are we going to get those resources from?
It's a tricky one, actually. I guess what I've done in the past is I've leveraged heavily on people outside of the technology, outside of the security space. So I've had security professionals driving the security awareness campaign because they know the subject matter content, but then really using the communications and the marketing and the branding people within the firm to say, right, how do I deliver this? How do I keep this message on track? And really bringing them in to help. And actually, they become real partners really very quickly. And so it really was every time we created a new security message, which is pretty regularly, we'd go to comms and say, right, this is what we want to say. And they'd criticize it and critique it and tune it and refine it and help us make sure we stayed on message and told our story in the right way.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure you have to make a choice about which comes first, but really, I think it is just collaboration between a wider skill set of people. It just doesn't sit on the firewall guy's desk anymore. You have to go out and bring in the additional perspectives and experience and talent to make sure that you're pushing a better holistic message across to your enterprise, so they can pick up on all the facts and get consistent messaging and be influenced in the right way. Not just having another technology story thrown at them.
Yeah. Okay. So I made a forecast. I did a presentation at the ISF, one of their annual conferences. I think it might have been in Copenhagen, and I was asked to make a prediction about what the future CISO would look like in 2030. That wasn't when I was asked to do it, because obviously I clearly don't have a time machine. But I was asked, what do you think the future CISO will look like in 2030? And I made this. I made a forecast which actually made the room go quiet.
I should write this down. Probably should remind me in a few years. Carry on, go on.
I feel need to, because then when I looked at the Twitter stream for the conference afterwards as well, it came out, and there were actually quite a few people who were responding to it. Luckily, Twitter doesn't put a down thumb. It only puts an up thumb one, because from an emotional response perspective, it's behavioral psychology says people click on the up unless the down. But yeah, my forecast was this: that the future CISO would have some form of behavioral psychology training, or that in the absence of them having that they would almost have like a two deputies, one that focuses on the technical architectural side of security and one that focuses on the human aspect, and that those two would be jointly responsible for delivering the CISO's vision and strategy.
Yeah.
What do you think to that?
I think the second of those suggestions makes more sense. I think the board still wants somebody who's technically competent to stand up in front of them, someone who can actually talk the whole stack all the way through. Right. And so if the board want to ask about TCP/IP packets, which is probably not a terribly wise question for them, but if they do, the CISO needs to be able to answer that. And that takes years and years of study to understand that whole technology stack. Mm-hmm. But I do agree on that second point. I think that having a number two, a second in command, a deputy who's focused entirely on human aspects would be a really wise idea. And one of the reasons for that is the CISO role these days is so vast. You're drawn into every part of the enterprise, whether it's developing new systems, buying new premises, business continuity, whatever it happens to be, third parties, vendor selection. The CISO has got responsibility in that. And so actually the role is spread so very thinly. And I was having a discussion on LinkedIn just a couple of days ago about the need for a chief product security officer within enterprises, so they can keep focus on the security that you're building into your products and your tools for the future, to make sure you're not creating a legacy problem for the future. And so I think the role will expand. There'll be more deputies with more specific hats on underneath. And I completely agree. I think one of those should be focused entirely on culture, awareness, behavior, and that human aspect of how we create the right way of working within our enterprise, and also looking out for our customers too.
So, Andrew, I think it was great. It's been an absolute pleasure having this conversation with you again. I suspect if we have another conversation like tomorrow, we just have another hour that we just go burning right through
into a different direction. Who knows where we go next time? Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's been great to have you here sharing your insights. They're always really worthwhile for our listeners. I'm sure they'll take away a lot from hearing what you've got to say about the human side of the information security challenge for CISOs and senior education awareness managers and security managers. So thank you very much for joining us on the show.
It's absolutely my pleasure, Bruce.
Hi there. What a great way to kick off the first in this mini cybersecurity series in partnership with our friends at ProofPoint by having their very own European in-house CISO Andrew Rose come on the show and get the ball rolling. Really, really interesting. I've always thought Andrew was a bit of a thought leader in terms of the opportunities that insights into behavior and culture can play in terms of how you design education and awareness programs. And so it's always great to have him come on the show and to share even more insights into what he's seen going on at the moment. Now, if you found the type of interview and questions and insights of interest to you, how can you sort of get more? Well, the easy option is to subscribe via Stitcher, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or visit the www.re-thinkingthehumanfactor.com website, the podcast page, and subscribe there. The great news is that with our friends at ProofPoint, we're going to be publishing another 5 of those episodes. And we're going to have some amazing guests on, some from within ProofPoint, but actually quite a few of them from outside of the cybersecurity industry, following the traditional format that we have at the Rethinking the Human Factor. We've got somebody coming on speaking very much from an L&D perspective, somebody who was appointed by Obama to look at L&D and innovation within the US. We've got somebody coming on who's going to be talking about culture and the role of technology around culture. And we've also got a conversation happening where we're going to be talking about international marketing and branding and the role of data within that as well, and drawing parallels with the challenges that we face as CISOs, education managers, and security professionals when it comes to sort of changing behaviors, getting people to buy into our vision and our values as brands, and the role of data strategy as part of that. So yeah, we've got some really great episodes coming up. So yeah, please, subscribe via one of the platforms I identified, or visit the rethinkingthehumanfactor.com website. Great. Well, look, it's going to be a week now before we publish the next podcast. So in the meantime, go check out the other episodes that we have published in the past. And I think there's 36, 37 of them now over the last 4 years. And look, it'd be great to have you back with us in a week's time to hear episode 2 of the mini cybersecurity series with our friends at ProofPoint. Thanks.